Snow was falling over Red Cedar when 64-year-old Wes Ransom realized he had only 6 weeks left before retirement. For more than 20 years, people called him when roads froze, machines failed, or someone needed help getting through the storm. Then one winter night, a German shepherd mother named Tessa arrived with 3 puppies and quietly changed the rhythm of his life. Wes thought he was only giving them a warm place to stay, but soon he was learning their footsteps, their habits, and how much a home could change when someone needed you. The hardest part came later, not when the dogs arrived, but when each of them began finding a life that no longer required him. And somewhere between an empty dog pen, an old radio, and a snowplow leaving without him, Wes had to decide what being useful really meant. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. At 4:43 on a January morning, Wesley Ransom stood beneath the fluorescent lights of the Red Cedar Public Works garage, with one hand wrapped around a dented steel thermos and the other resting on the hood of a snowplow that refused to start. Outside, northern Wisconsin was still black. The snow had not begun yet, but the cold had settled hard over the town. Frost feathered the garage windows. Salt trucks waited in 2 straight rows beneath the overhead doors, their amber lights dark. Wes listened while the mechanic turned the ignition again. Nothing. "Battery's fine," the younger man said. Wes took another drink of coffee. "Then stop asking the battery." The mechanic glanced at him, caught the hint of a smile buried beneath the short salt and pepper stubble around Wes's jaw, and opened the fuel housing. At 64, Wes still looked like a man built for heavy work. He stood a little over 6 feet 2, broad through the shoulders, with thick hands and a rectangular face weathered by years of cold air. Dark brown hair, cut short but never quite neat, had gone silver at both temples. The scar near his right eyebrow had faded enough that most people stopped noticing it after the first few conversations. Very few people in Red Cedar knew much about where it came from. That suited Wes. More than 20 years earlier, after leaving the Navy SEALs in his early 40s, he had tried private security work. The money was good. The airports, guarded compounds, clipped radio conversations, and men who liked telling old stories were not. He had already spent enough of his life inside that world. A friend had helped him get a job with Red Cedar Public Works. At first, Wes repaired plows, dump trucks, and small engines. Later, he began taking winter call-outs. Eventually, he became the man people called when freezing rain covered County Road 18 before dawn, or when a plow quit halfway through clearing the route to the nursing home. He liked the work for reasons he rarely explained. Snow fell, roads had to open. A machine failed, someone fixed it. An ambulance needed a clear lane. Nobody cared what Wes had done 30 years ago. Nobody asked what he remembered. They only needed the road open by morning. The younger mechanic leaned deeper beneath the hood. "Fuel shut-off sticking?" Wes nodded. "That's what I was waiting for you to tell me." "You knew?" "I suspected. Could have saved me 10 minutes. Then you'd still suspect the battery next time." The mechanic shook his head. Wes turned away before the kid could see him smile. 6 weeks, that was what remained. 6 more weeks before the retirement date printed on paperwork Wes himself had signed 3 months earlier. No one was forcing him out. That part mattered to him. His right knee had begun to ache after long shifts on frozen pavement. Overnight call-outs took longer to recover from than they had 5 years earlier. His pension was fully vested. The town had already trained his replacement, a capable 43-year-old named Collins, who had been shadowing him through 2 winters. Every reasonable fact pointed in the same direction: retire. Wes had agreed with all of them. Then the papers were signed. After that, the idea stopped feeling reasonable. It started feeling like a door closing behind him. Near 6, Collins came into the garage carrying a clipboard. "Forecast changed." Wes held out his hand. Collins gave him the sheet. The storm expected late that night had accelerated. Snowfall totals were higher. Winds would increase after dark, with drifting likely across the open farm roads north of town. Wes read the report twice. Get the East Route trucks fueled before lunch. Salt stock? 82%. Make it 90. Already called. Wes looked up. Collins shrugged. Figured you'd say that. For a second, Wes felt something he could not name. Pride, perhaps. Or irritation. Maybe both. Collins was learning the job exactly as he was supposed to. That was the problem. Wes handed back the clipboard. Good. The word came out flatter than he intended. Later that morning, while changing gloves beside his locker, Wes saw another radio charging on the shelf. It had a strip of white tape beneath the speaker. Collins. Wes looked at his own radio clipped to the belt of his faded navy work jacket. Ransom. He had carried some version of that radio for nearly 20 years. It had woken him during ice storms, floods, downed power lines, and Christmas mornings when nobody else in Red Cedar wanted to leave a warm house. 6 weeks from now, Collins's radio would be the one people called first. Wes stood there long enough for the motion sensor light over the lockers to switch off. For several seconds, he remained in the dimness. Then he moved, and the lights came back on. He shut the locker harder than necessary. At noon, his phone buzzed, a message from Dale Norwood. Still pretending you're too busy Thursday? Wes read it while standing beside the parts counter. Dale was 67, shorter than Wes, heavier around the middle, with a thick gray mustache and the habit of keeping a pencil behind one ear. He had been chief mechanic at Public Works for years. He and Wes had worked together for nearly 2 decades. There had been a time when Dale walked into Wes's kitchen without knocking. There had been a time when Wes knew exactly how Dale took his coffee. Then Dale's knee deteriorated badly enough that he retired. Wes had attended the little retirement lunch in the garage. He had promised to visit. At first he did, then less often, eventually almost never. Dale now volunteered at Red Cedar Community Workshop, which occupied part of the old vocational school on Maple Street. Retired machinists fixed lawn equipment there. Someone taught basic woodworking on Wednesdays. People repaired chairs, made birdhouses, sharpened tools, and drank coffee that Dale claimed was better than anything Public Works ever bought. He had invited Wes at least 6 times. Wes always had a reason. Winter schedule, equipment inspection, overtime, weather coming. There was always weather coming in Wisconsin. Wes typed, "Storm tonight." The reply arrived almost immediately. "Of course there is." Wes put the phone away. By late afternoon, the sky had disappeared. Snow came first as fine grains sweeping sideways across the highway. Then the wind strengthened, and the grains became thick sheets that erased the far end of the Public Works lot. The temperature dropped. Amber lights came alive across the garage. Engines started one by one. Men pulled on reflective parkas, checked radios, climbed into trucks. Wes moved through the familiar routine in a charcoal thermal shirt beneath his insulated navy jacket, work pants darkened at the knees, brown boots salted white around the soles. His black military watch remained on his left wrist, one of the few things he had carried from one life into the next. Nobody needed to be told twice. Collins took the east routes. Another crew moved south toward the hospital corridor. Wes remained at the garage to coordinate equipment and cover failures. At 7:15, the sheriff's office announced the closure of a section of highway north of Red Cedar. At 7:40, visibility dropped again. At 8:12, the town emergency coordinator called. "Got an odd one for you." Wes looked through the office window at the snow hammering the yard. "If it's another sedan in a ditch, call towing." "Not a sedan," the coordinator explained. A local animal rescue transport had left earlier in the day, before the storm intensified faster than forecast. Highway closure had trapped the vehicle in Red Cedar. The driver had pulled into a safe lot, but the auxiliary heater in the animal compartment was becoming unreliable. They needed heated indoor space for several animals until morning. Wes looked toward the garage. No. There's a separate crew annex behind Bay 4. I know what's behind Bay 4. Separate ventilation, separate entrance, no fuel storage, backup power. I know my own building. The rescue coordinator is on her way. Wes closed his eyes. No animals in the garage. Not the garage, annex. That room is for staff. Tonight it's heated emergency space. Wes stared through the glass. A plow crossed the yard and disappeared into white. 20 minutes later, a woman in a charcoal parka walked through the side door, carrying a red clipboard under one arm. Marlene Avery was 55, sturdy rather than slight, with ash-blonde hair tied low at the back of her neck, and thin, brown-framed glasses dotted with melting snow. She did not appear particularly interested in the fact that Wes was broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, or once had a career people tended to ask too many questions about. She looked past him toward the corridor leading to the annex. That's the heated room? Yes. Running water? Yes. Generator backed? Yes. Separate from chemicals and equipment? Yes. Marlene nodded. Good. Wes folded his arms. You planning to ask permission at some point? I already did. Emergency management approved it. I meant mine. Marlene adjusted the clipboard beneath her arm. Is the room warm? Wes looked at her, then at the snow striking the window behind her. The question irritated him because it removed every argument he preferred to have. Was the room warm? Yes. Did something outside need warmth? Apparently. Everything else was decoration. Wes exhaled through his nose. Bring them through the side entrance. Nobody opens the interior door to the service base. Agreed. And they're gone in the morning. That is the plan. The rescue vehicle backed toward the annex 20 minutes later. Wes stood inside while the outer door opened. Cold air rolled across the floor. Marlene entered first. Then came the dog. She was a German shepherd, perhaps 4 years old, with a thick winter coat patterned in warm gold and deep black. Her saddle marking sat slightly heavier over the left shoulder. One ear stood straight while the tip of the other leaned subtly outward. Tessa, according to the tag on her temporary rescue collar. She stopped just inside the room, not frightened, assessing. Her amber-brown eyes moved over Wes, the folding tables, the water sink, the stack of clean towels. Behind her came the puppies. The largest male, Bram, crossed the threshold immediately on oversized paws, nose already working as though he had been appointed building inspector. Juniper, lighter and more honey-colored, followed him but veered toward a box of folded towels and sniffed its bottom corner with complete concentration. The smallest puppy remained outside. Otis. He stood with his front paws just beyond the threshold, body low, staring into the unfamiliar room. Marlene did not pull him. Wes noticed that. Neither did Tessa. The mother dog turned around. She went back 2 steps and touched her nose gently to the top of Otis's head. The little dog looked at her, then at the room, then took 1 step and another. Wes found himself watching until Otis had crossed completely inside. Marlene closed the outer door. The wind became muffled. Suddenly, there were 4 dogs in a room that 2 hours earlier had contained nothing more interesting than folding chairs, a microwave, and a coffee machine no one cleaned properly. Bram began investigating a table leg. Juniper discovered the towels. Otis stayed close to Tessa. Tessa remained standing, watching Wes. Wes stood on the opposite side of the room with his thermos in one hand. He had 6 weeks left in a job that had structured more than 20 years of his life. There was a storm outside. 3 plow crews were working. His replacement had his own radio. And now a German shepherd was looking at him as though she had not yet decided whether he belonged in his own building. Marlene began arranging the temporary pen. Should only be until morning. Wes looked at Tessa. Bram had already found one of his work gloves beneath a chair. Wes walked over and took it before the puppy could drag it away. "One night," he said. Marlene glanced up. Wes placed the glove on the table. One night. By 7 the next morning, Red Cedar had begun digging itself out. The storm had moved east, leaving behind pale blue sky, waist-high drifts along the open roads, and snow packed against the lower half of the public works doors. Highway crews reopened one lane at a time while plows moved north in staggered runs. Inside the heated annex, Wes stood with his thermos near the doorway and watched 4 dogs wake up. Bram woke first. The large puppy stretched, climbed over Otis without apology, and immediately began looking for something he had not been allowed to touch the night before. Juniper emerged next and shook herself so hard she nearly fell sideways. Otis remained curled against Tessa. The mother German shepherd lifted her head when Wes entered, amber eyes following him until he set a bowl of fresh water near the temporary pen and stepped back. One night, he reminded nobody in particular. Marlene Avery was already on the phone. Her expression changed while she listened. When she hung up, Wes knew before she said anything that morning had become more complicated. The foster house had a pipe burst. Wes took a drink of coffee. How bad? Water got through the main floor. They shut down the heat until somebody can inspect the electrical and plumbing. How long? They're hoping a week. Wes looked toward the puppies. Bram had found the loose end of a folded towel. No. Marlene raised one eyebrow. I haven't asked anything yet. You were going to. I was going to tell you the rescue is open. Good. But it's crowded. Wes stared at her. Marlene did not add drama to the statement. She simply explained that several winter intake cases had filled most of the quieter kennels. There was room for Tessa and her puppies, but the building carried the usual sounds of a rescue operating near capacity. Doors opening, dogs calling to one another, carts moving over concrete. Tessa was still nursing 3 puppies and gradually beginning the weaning process. Moving her was possible. It just might not be ideal. That's what the rescue is for, Wes said. It is. So take them there. Marlene nodded once. All right. Her agreement irritated him more than an argument would have. Before anything was moved, Dr. Naomi Kerr arrived to perform an examination. She was 52, compact and quick-moving, with dark chestnut hair cut near her jaw and a few silver strands that she made no effort to hide. Navy scrubs showed beneath a charcoal fleece, and a small teal notebook appeared from her pocket whenever she wanted to record something. Naomi did not speak to the dogs in a high, cheerful voice. She entered the pen slowly, let Tessa smell the back of her hand, then began with the mother before examining each puppy. Wes stayed outside. How are they? He asked. Healthy. All 4? All 4. Naomi checked Tessa's weight, hydration, and general condition, then watched the puppies move around the annex. At their age, they're beginning to eat more on their own, but they're still learning from her and still nursing. I wouldn't separate them yet unless we had a reason. Wes nodded toward the rescue vehicle outside. You have somewhere for them? We do. Naomi looked at Tessa, who had settled with all 3 puppies against her. Then she looked back at Wes. A quieter foster would be easier on her for the next several days. No, Naomi smiled faintly. I didn't ask you, Marlene did. Could you take them as an emergency foster until the other house is usable? No. Marlene tucked her clipboard beneath one arm. All right. Again, no argument. She simply asked, do you want to see the rescue before we move them? Wes should have said no. Instead, an hour later, he was standing in the hallway of the county rescue facility, wearing his faded navy work jacket and an expression that discouraged conversation. The building was clean. That almost made things worse. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. Volunteers moved efficiently. Bowls were washed, bedding was changed. Each kennel had water, blankets, and identification cards. But the building was full. A hound called from one side of the corridor. Another dog answered. A metal bowl rattled against a kennel door. Wes watched a volunteer kneel beside a nervous dog and wait for it to approach. Nobody was neglecting anything. Nobody was doing a poor job. There were simply too many animals in too little quiet. Marlene stood beside him without speaking. Wes looked through the window toward an empty family kennel that could have held Tessa and the puppies. Then he looked at Marlene. How temporary. A few days, most likely. He exhaled. I don't have dog equipment. We do. I work. We have volunteers. I don't want people coming through my house. We can work around your schedule. Wes looked back through the glass. This is not permanent. No. He pointed a finger at her. And if one of those puppies eats my furniture, that's your problem. That is not generally how fostering works. Then put it in the paperwork. Marlene laughed for the first time. That afternoon, Wesley Ransom signed an emergency foster agreement. His house passed inspection with fewer problems than Wes expected. Marlene walked through the property while he followed her, increasingly offended by questions that he knew were reasonable. Any other animals? No. Medications within reach? No. Garage chemicals? Garage is locked. Fence height? 6 feet. Gate latch? Wes opened and closed it twice. Marlene wrote something on her clipboard. What? Gate secure. I know it's secure. Then we're having a very successful inspection. The laundry room became the dog's primary space. It had a washable floor, a window overlooking the backyard, and enough room for the rescue's pen and a crate with the door left open. Cleaning supplies were moved to a locked cabinet. Electrical cords disappeared behind a protective cover. Rescue food, washable bedding, bowls, puppy pads, and an emergency contact sheet arrived in 2 large plastic bins. By 6 that evening, Wes's house no longer looked entirely like Wes's house. He responded by creating order. A feeding schedule appeared on the whiteboard beside the refrigerator. Clean towels went on the upper shelf. Used towels had their own basket. The digital scale sat beside the pen. Water stayed in one location, food stayed in another. Marlene watched him label a container. You know they can't read. I can. Tessa watched too. She was less impressed. When Wes crossed the laundry room too quickly to retrieve a towel, she rose at once and shifted between him and the puppies. Wes stopped. The reaction was not aggressive. It was clear. He backed away. A minute later, he sat on the floor outside the pen instead of reaching across it. Tessa remained standing for several seconds. Then she lay down. Wes said nothing. The next morning, Bram stole his glove. Not an old glove. The good, insulated work glove Wes had left beside the back door. He found Bram dragging it toward the laundry room with both front paws spread wide for balance. Absolutely not! Bram pulled harder. Wes took one end, the puppy kept the other. For 5 seconds, an 80-something pound difference in body weight failed to matter to either participant. Then Tessa stood up. Wes released the glove immediately. Bram fell backward and sat there looking pleased with himself. You won nothing, Wes told him. Juniper developed a preference for clean laundry. She ignored the dog beds Marlene had brought and slept on folded towels whenever Wes forgot to place them high enough. Otis preferred the space beneath a kitchen chair. He often paused before crossing unfamiliar surfaces, looking first toward Tessa, then moving once she did. By the 3rd day, Wes could identify which puppy was moving before he looked. Bram ran. Juniper pattered quickly and changed direction without warning. Otis moved more carefully. Wes did not tell anyone he had noticed. On the 5th morning, his phone rang at 4:18. A freezing drizzle had passed over Red Cedar during the night. A stretch of road near the nursing home had glazed before the salt crews reached it. Wes dressed in less than 4 minutes. Then he reached the kitchen and stopped. 3 puppies were asleep. Tessa was awake. He could not leave them alone for an unknown number of hours. Marlene had given him a list of volunteers. Wes picked up the sheet, put it down. His phone contacts contained another name, Dale Norwood. He stared at it long enough for the screen to dim. Wes had spent most of his adult life believing there were two categories of problems, ones he could solve himself and ones he had not worked on long enough. Asking someone to come sit in his house at 4:30 in the morning fit neither category comfortably. He pressed call. Dale answered on the fourth ring. "This better be weather." "It is." A pause. "What broke?" "Nothing." Another pause, longer this time. Wes looked toward the laundry room. "I need somebody here for a couple hours." Dale was silent. Then, "You sick?" "No." "Then what am I watching?" Wes closed his eyes. "Dogs." The silence on the other end changed. Not confusion, enjoyment. "I'll be there in 10. Dale arrived in an old pickup wearing a faded denim jacket over dark red flannel, gray mustache untidy from sleep, and a pencil still tucked behind one ear for reasons Wes had never understood. He walked inside. Bram charged toward his boots. Juniper followed. Otis stayed back near Tessa. Dale looked down at the puppies, then up at Wes. "Finally found something that made you call somebody." Wes handed him the emergency contact sheet. "Food schedule's on the refrigerator." "Good morning to you, too." "Don't let Bram have my gloves." "Which one's Bram?" Bram bit Dale's bootlace. Dale looked down. "Never mind." Wes picked up his thermos. He reached the door, stopped, and looked back once. Tessa was watching him. Dale was already sitting on the kitchen floor with Juniper trying to climb his leg. For years, Wes had avoided asking Dale for anything because needing help felt dangerously close to becoming the kind of man Wes did not know how to be. Now Dale was in his kitchen before sunrise because 3 puppies needed someone there. Nothing terrible had happened. The ceiling had not collapsed. No one had kept score. Wes opened the door. "Coffee's in the cabinet." Dale looked up. "I know where you keep the coffee." Wes stood still for half a second. Of course he did. Then Wes left for work. At the end of the first week, Marlene returned. She did not bring empty crates. Wes noticed immediately. "The foster house?" he asked. "Insurance adjuster came yesterday." "And?" "More damage than they thought. Flooring, drywall, part of the heating system. At least a month." Wes glanced toward the laundry room. Marlene continued. "They've withdrawn from fostering for now. It's the right decision." "So what's the plan?" "The rescue can still take Tessa." Wes waited. Or you can continue fostering until the puppies are old enough for placement and Tessa finishes weaning them." This time there was no storm, no failing heater, no emergency coordinator, no reason Wes could blame on weather, procedure, or lack of alternatives. Juniper appeared beneath the kitchen table with one of his socks in her mouth. Wes pointed. "Drop that." She did not. Tessa was asleep near the edge of the pen, no longer positioned directly across the entrance. Bram was upside down beside her. Otis had fallen asleep beneath the same kitchen chair he had chosen on the first evening. Marlene waited. Wes looked around the house. A week earlier he had agreed to one night because the room was warm. Then a few days because the rescue was crowded. Those had been circumstances. This was a choice. He looked back at Marlene. "All right." She reached for the paperwork. "But I want the full veterinary schedule," Wes added. "Appointments, vaccines, everything. And I want to know what happens before any of them goes to a new home." Marlene's expression softened, but she was smart enough not to make anything of it. "I'll bring you the file." Wes bent down and retrieved his sock from Juniper. "You're also replacing these." "That," Marlene said, "is still not how fostering works." Wes looked at the puppy. Juniper immediately grabbed the other end of the sock. For the first time, Wes let her keep it. By the beginning of the second week, Wes no longer needed the whiteboard to know when the house was awake. Bram announced morning by throwing his weight against whatever happened to be nearest. Juniper preferred stealth. She could cross half the kitchen before Wes noticed her, usually because something soft had begun moving in the wrong direction. Otis woke quietly. Tessa woke before all of them. But even that had changed. During the first several nights, the mother German Shepherd had slept with her body positioned between the puppies and the laundry room door. The smallest change in the house brought her head up. Now, some mornings, Wes found her asleep outside the pen. Not far, never careless, just no longer guarding every breath. One Tuesday morning, Wes opened the back door and found an old tennis ball on the mat. It was dirty, flattened on one side, and faded almost white in places. Dale had discovered it beneath a workbench in Wes's garage while looking for a socket set 2 days earlier. "Pretty sure this thing predates your retirement paperwork," Dale had said. Wes had tossed it into a box. Apparently, Tessa disagreed with that decision. She stood behind him now, eyes fixed on the ball. Wes looked at her. "You've got 3 puppies in there destroying my property, and this is what you want?" Tessa waited. Wes picked up the ball and rolled it across the packed snow just beyond the back step. She moved after it immediately. Not like a working dog on command, not like a mother responding to a puppy. For 10 seconds, Tessa was simply a dog chasing an old tennis ball. She returned with it, dropped it near the door, then walked back inside without asking for another throw. The next morning, the ball was there again, and the morning after that. By Friday, Wes caught himself looking for it before he put on his boots. He did not think much about why. Naomi Kerr arrived that afternoon for the puppy's scheduled check. She weighed all 3, checked teeth and general development, then let them move around the kitchen while she watched. Bram found the zipper on her equipment bag. Juniper attempted to climb onto a lower chair rung. Otis sat beneath the table, tracking Naomi with his eyes. She snapped her fingers softly to one side. Bram looked, Juniper looked. Otis did not. Naomi changed position. Another small sound. This time, Otis turned immediately. Wes noticed her expression. "What?" "Nothing yet." "You made that face." "I have several faces." "That one means you're thinking." Naomi crouched several feet behind Otis and made another quiet noise from his left side. The puppy continued watching Juniper. Then Tessa moved. Otis turned toward his mother and only afterward looked toward Naomi. She reached into her teal notebook. "I want to check something further." Wes leaned against the counter. "His ears?" "His responses." "He hears me, I know. If Bram drops something, Otis hears it." "Sometimes." Naomi closed the notebook. "That is why I'm not telling you anything definitive today." Wes disliked answers that ended with waiting. "What do we do?" "We arrange a proper hearing assessment." "When?" "I'll call the clinic in Green Bay that has the equipment." "How far?" "About an hour and a half in good weather." Wes glanced toward the window. Snow was beginning again, light and harmless. Naomi followed his eyes. "We're not driving anywhere tonight. Otis isn't in pain. He's eating, playing, gaining weight, and interacting normally. We have time to do this correctly." Wes nodded. He understood every word. He still checked Otis 3 times before bed. The appointment took place 4 days later. Marlene came because the dogs legally remained under the rescue's care. Wes drove because he had already mapped the route, checked the weather, filled the truck, and decided there was no reasonable argument for anyone else doing it. Otis rode in a secured crate behind the passenger seat. He slept for most of the drive. The specialty clinic was brighter and quieter than Wes expected. A veterinary technician explained the procedure before anyone touched Otis. The electrodes would record how his auditory system responded to controlled sounds. Wes asked enough questions that Marlene eventually leaned back in her chair and stopped pretending not to be entertained. "You interrogate every veterinarian like this?" "Only the ones attaching wires to something I'm responsible for." "You're fostering him." "That changes the definition of responsible?" Marlene looked at him for a second. "No." The results were clear. Otis had congenital hearing loss on one side. His other ear functioned normally. There was no sign that the condition was painful or likely to worsen because of anything Wes had done. The veterinarian explained that Otis could live a full, active life. He would simply need people who understood how he perceived his surroundings. Approaching from his weaker side could startle him. Visual cues would matter. Good fencing would matter. Consistent training would matter. Wes listened without interruption. On the drive home, he said almost nothing. Otis slept again. Marlene watched the snowy fields pass outside. After 20 miles, she said, "He's still the same puppy he was this morning." "I know." "You've said 3 words since we left." "4 now." Marlene smiled and let the silence stay. That night, Wes opened a legal pad. He began with reasonable notes. Visual commands, secure yard, household understands unilateral hearing loss. Then the list expanded. How tall should a fence be? Would a house near a busy road automatically be unsuitable? How many hours could Otis reasonably be left alone? How close should the nearest veterinary clinic be? Should a future owner have previous German Shepherd experience? Previous experience with hearing-impaired dogs? A backup caregiver? A second fenced area? Wes stopped after filling most of a page. He read it, then added, "No unsupervised off-leash outdoor access." The next afternoon, Naomi came by with instructions for beginning simple hand cues. She looked at Wes's legal pad. Then she turned the page. There was another page. "You planning to approve his future mortgage too?" Wes did not smile. "I want whoever takes him to know what they're doing." "So do I." "He can get surprised from the left." "Yes." "He watches traffic less reliably if something is behind him." "Potentially." "He needs a secure yard." "Yes." Wes tapped the paper. "Then this matters." Naomi did not argue. She simply handed him a small training treat. "Show me your hand." Wes frowned. "For what?" "Otis." Naomi demonstrated a simple visual cue for sit. The movement was clear and uncomplicated. Wes copied it. Otis stared at him. Nothing happened. Bram appeared from nowhere and sat. Naomi laughed. "Wrong dog." "I noticed." Wes tried again. Otis looked at his hand, then at Wes's face, then back at the hand. He lowered himself onto the floor. Wes froze for half a second. Naomi gave him the treat. "Pay him." Wes did. The second repetition took less time. By the 5th, Otis was watching Wes's hands before Wes even gave the signal. Something shifted in Wes's expression. Not pity, interest. Otis was not failing to understand the world. He was simply gathering information from somewhere else. The puppy proved the point repeatedly over the next few days. Bram was physically stronger and could take nearly any toy he wanted if nobody interrupted him. Juniper was faster. Otis watched. When Wes began hiding small pieces of kibble around the kitchen as a basic scent and search game, Bram charged in the direction Wes had last walked. Juniper searched every corner. Otis watched Wes's shoulders, then his hands, then the floor. He found the first piece, then the second. Wes stared at him. "You've been cheating." Otis wagged his entire rear half. At the back door, Wes began using the same visual cue before opening it. Otis learned that too. Marlene sent him a guide on training dogs with partial hearing. Wes printed it, then printed another copy because the first got a coffee stain on it. He told himself this was simply good foster practice. Naomi did not comment. Dale arrived one afternoon carrying a new gate latch. The old one worked, but he claimed Wes's design required the hand strength of a hydraulic press and therefore needed improvement. Wes held the gate while Dale replaced it. Tessa lay in the snow nearby with the tennis ball between her paws. The puppies explored inside a temporary fence section of the yard. Dale tightened the final bolt. Behind them, Wes raised one hand. Otis was 10 feet away. Wes gave the sit signal. Otis watched him and sat. Dale rested both hands on the gate. Not bad. Wes looked toward the puppy. He just needs a different way. Dale's eyes remained on Wes for another second. Whatever thought passed through his mind, he kept it there. Gate works better now. Old gate worked. Old gate required a pry bar and a personal relationship with God. Wes tested the latch. It was, annoyingly, better. Later that evening, all 3 puppies were loose in the kitchen while Wes prepared their food. Bram pushed ahead first, as usual. Otis tried to follow. A low wooden barrier separated the kitchen from the laundry room. Bram stepped over it easily. Juniper climbed across sideways. Otis stopped. He put one front paw on the top, pulled it back, tried again. Tessa rose from beside the refrigerator. Wes expected her to approach. Instead, she stood several feet away. Otis put both front paws on the barrier. His hind legs slipped. He dropped back onto the kitchen floor. Wes instinctively shifted forward. Tessa did not. The puppy tried again. This time he got his chest over but could not bring the rear legs across. He backed down. Wes's hand moved toward the barrier, then stopped. Tessa remained where she was, not abandoning him, not rescuing him either. Otis looked at her. Tessa blinked once. The puppy turned back. On the 3rd attempt, he hooked one front paw farther over, pushed from the hind legs, and tumbled onto the other side. Bram immediately bumped into him. Otis got up and followed. Tessa lay down again. Wes remained standing beside the counter with his hand half raised. For years, helping had meant stepping in, taking weight, fixing the problem, preventing the mistake. He lowered his hand. Across the room, Tessa rested her head on her paws. Otis had already forgotten the barrier. Wes had not. By the time the puppies were 8 weeks old, Wes had stopped thinking of the laundry room as temporary. The pen still took up too much space. The towels still appeared where they did not belong. Bram had learned that if he pushed his nose under the cabinet door hard enough, it made a satisfying wooden knock. Juniper had discovered the exact chair Wes used when he drank coffee and treated the lower crossbar as her personal climbing frame. Otis watched hands now. Not constantly, but enough that Wes noticed when the puppy caught the beginning of a signal before it was fully given. Tessa had changed too. She still checked the puppies when they became noisy, but she no longer followed every movement. Some afternoons, while Bram and Juniper wrestled and Otis studied the world from beneath the table, Tessa carried the old tennis ball to the living room and lay near the window by herself. The house had become louder, less orderly, more occupied. That was why Wes disliked the folder Marlene placed on his kitchen table. "Applications," she said. He looked at it as though it contained tax notices. "They're barely 8 weeks. That's when we start the process. Nobody is leaving tonight." Wes sat opposite her. Marlene opened the folder. The rescue did not operate on a first-come, first-served basis. Applicants provided work schedules, housing details, veterinary references, fencing information, experience with dogs, and plans for exercise and training. Wes approved of that. At first. Then he began reading. The first applicant interested in Bram was a 46-year-old man named Kevin Laird. Stable job, no criminal history, permission from his apartment complex, no other pets. "He looks fine," Wes said. "He probably is fine," Marlene replied. "Then what's the problem?" "He works 10 to 11 hours a day." Wes kept reading. Kevin had never owned a German Shepherd. He had grown up with a small mixed-breed dog and said he wanted a shepherd because he had admired them for years. He also lived in a one-bedroom apartment without a private yard. Wes frowned. "He says he jogs." "He does." "That helps." "It does." Marlene turned another page. "But Bram is going to be a large, energetic dog. Kevin is gone most of the day, has no current training plan, and his backup is a neighbor who has never met the puppy. So you're denying him? Yes. Wes looked up. He didn't lie on anything. No. He showed up. Yes. He wants the dog. Yes. Marlene closed the folder. None of those things make him a bad person. Wes waited. They also don't automatically make his home the right one. For some reason, that answer stayed with him longer than he expected. There was no villain to reject, no obvious mistake, just a decent man whose life did not fit Bram very well. Wes looked across the room. Bram was trying to pull a blanket through a gap too narrow for the blanket. Seems unfair. To Kevin? To everybody. Marlene shrugged slightly. Matching usually is. 3 days later, Bram met another family. Mark and Allison Vetter were both in their 50s and ran a small apple orchard several miles outside Red Cedar. They arrived in a pickup that had dog hair on the rear seat before Bram ever climbed into it. That impressed Wes more than he wanted to admit. Mark was broad and quiet, with cracked hands and a canvas jacket that smelled faintly of wood smoke. Allison had short, gray-blonde hair and carried a pouch of treats she never opened until Marlene told her she could. They had owned 2 German Shepherds over the previous 20 years. Their last dog had died the year before. They worked mostly from home. Their property had secure fencing around the house and orchard work areas. Bram liked Mark's bootlaces immediately. Mark let him chew for several seconds before redirecting him to a rope toy. Wes watched. What happens during harvest? Allison answered. We hire seasonal workers, but one of us is almost always at the house. Vacation? Usually 5 days in February. Who watches the dog? My sister. She lives next door. Fence height? 6 feet. Gate? Double latch. Marlene glanced toward Wes. He ignored her. Nothing in the meeting felt perfect. That helped. Bram tried to eat part of Allison's coat zipper. Mark stepped on his own leash. Tessa barked once when a delivery truck passed outside. But Wes could imagine Bram there. That was the problem. He could imagine it too easily. Juniper's meeting came the following weekend. Sandra Bell was 63 and had retired from the Red Cedar Library 2 years earlier. She arrived with her older sister, Louise, 66, who lived with her in a 1-story house near the edge of town. Sandra had owned 2 German Shepherds as an adult. The second had lived to 13. Before Marlene could ask, Sandra produced a printed confirmation for an obedience class beginning the following month. Wes looked at the paper. You already paid for this? I already paid for the class. You don't have the dog yet. Sandra smiled. If it isn't Juniper, it'll be another dog eventually. That answer earned her more trust than if she had promised Juniper was the one. Louise did not kneel or call the puppy. She sat in a chair and waited. Juniper inspected Sandra first, then the room, then Louise's boots. Within 15 minutes, she had dragged the edge of Louise's scarf halfway off the chair. Louise looked down. Well, that seems clear. Sandra laughed. Wes did too before he could stop himself. Tessa watched from the pen. She did not interfere. Otis was different. Wes knew that before Howard and Elaine Mercer arrived. He had added 3 more items to his list since the hearing evaluation. Marlene had crossed out one of them. Why did you remove within 20 minutes of an emergency veterinary hospital? Because half the county would fail. That doesn't make it unnecessary. It makes it unrealistic. Howard and Elaine were both in their early 60s. Howard was tall and narrow with silver hair combed straight back and the deliberate movements of someone who had spent years around nervous animals. Elaine was shorter, wore a dark blue quilted vest, and carried a folder containing veterinary records from their previous dog. A Labrador, deaf for most of his life. They had cared for him for nearly 12 years. Wes disliked how good the application looked. Howard did not call Otis. He knelt several feet away. Otis watched him. Howard raised one hand, a simple cue. Nothing happened. He waited, tried again. Otis tilted his head. Howard repeated the signal a third time. The puppy walked toward him. Wes felt something tighten beneath his ribs. Howard did not reach immediately. He let Otis smell his fingers first. Then he touched the puppy lightly beneath the chest. "That's a smart little guy," he said. Wes looked at Marlene. "How many stairs in their house?" Elaine answered. 3 at the front entrance, none inside. Main floor bedroom. Backyard? Fenced. Height? 6 feet. What happens if you travel? Our niece lives 10 minutes away. How often? Maybe once a year. What if one of you gets sick? Elaine glanced at Howard, then back at Wes. Our niece again, and our neighbor has been helping us with dogs for 15 years. Wes continued. Closest veterinarian? 12 minutes. Emergency clinic? 45 in good weather. What about winter? Marlene shifted in her chair. Howard did not seem offended. Longer, he said, like everybody else around here. Wes looked down at the application. Every box was checked. Still, he found himself searching for one they had missed. Naomi had come by for the meeting and had remained mostly quiet. Now she placed a hand on the folder and turned it toward Wes. Howard and Elaine meet every standard you wrote down. Wes said nothing. Naomi tapped the page once. What standard are they still failing? He looked at her. She did not soften the question. She also did not answer it for him. Otis sat beside Howard's knee, watching the older man's hands. Wes stood. I need to get back to public works. Marlene looked at the clock. It was Saturday. Wes knew she noticed. He took his jacket anyway. Dale came over that evening without being invited. Wes was in the garage adjusting the blade on an old snow shovel that did not need adjusting. Dale stood in the doorway in his denim jacket and dark red flannel. You left early. Wes did not look up. Marlene called you? No. Naomi? No. Then how do you know? Small town. Wes tightened a bolt. Dale watched. That shovel planning to see combat? Wes set the wrench down. What do you want? To see if you're acting stupid on purpose or by accident. Wes turned toward him. You don't know anything about it. I know you've got 3 puppies that need homes. I know what Otis needs. Good. He has partial hearing. He needs people who understand that. Sounds like you found some. Wes's jaw tightened. You think because you retired 3 years ago you understand everything? Dale's expression changed. The humor left first. Wes continued. You walked away. Good for you. Some of us still care whether the next person knows what they're doing. Dale leaned against the workbench. Collins know what he's doing? That has nothing to do with this. Sure. Don't. You trained him. Dale, you spent a year training him. I said don't. Dale straightened. Then say what you're actually mad about. Wes stepped closer. You don't understand what it's like watching somebody take over something you were better at. Silence settled between them. Dale looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, I retired 3 years ago, Wes. Wes said nothing. You see me disappear? The question landed without force. That made it worse. Wes looked away. Go home. Dale nodded once. All right. He put on his gloves. At the door, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small brass key on the workbench. Wes looked at it. What's that? Community workshop. I don't want it. Generator won't start. Call somebody. I did. Wes stared at him. Dale opened the door. Tuesday, 7 o'clock, if you're free. Then he left. Wes did not follow. Later, the house was dark except for the stove light. The puppies slept in the pen. Bram twitched in a dream. Juniper lay on her back with one paw against the side panel. Otis slept closest to the kitchen. Tessa was on the floor, several feet from Wes. Not touching him, not guarding the puppies, just there. The brass key sat on the counter. Wes had carried it in from the garage without remembering doing so. He turned it once between his fingers, then set it down again. Tessa lifted her head. Wes looked toward the pen. Tomorrow he would still have 3 puppies in the house. His radio would still say Ransom. Collins would still be his replacement. Nothing had been decided that night. That was what made the room feel different. For once, Wes had no machine to repair, no road to clear, and no list long enough to tell him what the right answer was. Tuesday morning was bright enough to hurt the eyes. Fresh snow covered the sidewalks along Maple Street, and the old vocational school looked almost respectable beneath it. The brick building had been built in the 1960s, closed as a school years later, and eventually reopened in pieces by the town. The Red Cedar Community Workshop occupied what had once been the automotive wing. Wes parked outside at 6:52. He sat in the truck for another 3 minutes. The brass key Dale had left on his workbench rested in his palm. Wes told himself he was there because of the generator, nothing more. He unlocked the side door. The first thing he smelled was sawdust, the second was coffee. Dale was already inside, wearing his dark red flannel beneath a denim apron, a pencil tucked behind one ear as usual. "You came." "The generator?" Dale pointed toward the back. "Good morning to you too." There were 5 other people in the workshop. No one formed a circle. No one asked Wes to introduce himself. One gray-haired man was bent over a snowblower with its cover removed. 2 women were assembling a wooden bench for the town's spring market. Near a window, another man was replacing the hinge on a kitchen cabinet door and muttering at it as though the hinge had made a personal decision to be difficult. It looked less like a program and more like a garage where nobody had been told to leave. Wes preferred that immediately. The generator sat beside the rear wall. He removed the cover, checked the fuel line, pulled the plug. Dale leaned against the bench. "You want help?" "No." "I figured." The machine had been stored improperly. Old fuel had left residue in the carburetor, and somebody had tried to compensate by adjusting things that did not need adjusting. Wes worked quietly. 48 minutes later, the generator started. It coughed once, settled, then ran evenly. Dale glanced at the clock. "Was hoping that would take longer." Wes wiped his hands on a rag. "Sorry to disappoint you." He began putting his tools away. An older man standing beside the snowblower walked over. He was probably 70, narrow through the shoulders, with wireframe glasses and a green sweatshirt stained with oil at one cuff. "You mind if I ask something?" Wes looked at him. The man pointed toward the generator. "I've got one at home. Every spring I have to fight with the thing. Runs fine after I get it started, but if it sits a few months, forget it." "What fuel do you leave in it?" The man told him. Wes asked 3 more questions. 10 minutes later, they were standing over the open generator while Wes explained what long storage did to the fuel system and what to check before winter. Then one of the women building the bench turned around. "What about ethanol-free fuel?" Wes answered. Another question followed, then another. By the time Wes checked his watch, 26 minutes had passed. He frowned at Dale. "You planned that." Dale was drinking coffee. "Planned what?" Wes pointed toward the room. Dale looked around innocently. "I own neither these people nor their questions." Wes put on his jacket. "I fixed your generator." "You did?" "Don't call me next week." "Wouldn't dream of it." Wes left. The following Tuesday, Dale called. A snowblower was pulling hard to the left. Wes went back. At home, the adoption approvals began arriving. Bram was first. Mark and Allison Vetter had completed their home check, veterinary references, and final paperwork. Their orchard property met the rescue's requirements. Marlene scheduled the transfer for Thursday morning. Wes read the confirmation twice. Then he checked the weather for the Vetter property. Marlene caught him doing it. They live 12 miles away. Roads drift out there. They have lived there 23 years. I know. And somehow survived all 23 winters? Wes closed the weather app. Thursday came anyway. Allison brought a collar that was too large because she had expected Bram to be bigger. Marlene adjusted it. Mark sat on the floor while Bram attempted to climb onto his leg. Tessa watched from several feet away. When it was time to leave, Wes carried the food transition sheet outside. Mark had Bram on a leash. The puppy pulled toward the truck, distracted by the smell of something near the tire. "He's going to chew things," Wes said. Allison smiled. "We've owned shepherd puppies." "He'll still chew things. We believe you." "Don't change food all at once." "We won't." "And the left side of the orchard fence, Wes?" Marlene's voice was quiet. He stopped. Mark opened the truck door. Bram climbed in with help, immediately turned around and tried to come back out. Everyone waited. After a few seconds, he became interested in the blanket on the seat instead. The door closed. Tessa followed Wes to the gate. She stood watching the truck move down the road. Wes watched her. He expected something. He did not know what. Tessa remained still for several seconds. Then Juniper came from behind and grabbed a mouthful of fur near her hind leg. Tessa turned. The moment ended. She followed Juniper back toward the house. Wes remained by the gate another few seconds before going inside. 2 days later, Sandra and Louise came for Juniper. Sandra arrived with the same practical expression she had worn at the meeting. Louise brought a folded blanket that smelled like their house after having been left there for several days, as Marlene suggested. Juniper investigated the blanket, then Louise's shoelaces, then Sandra's coat pocket. "You sure you want this one?" Wes asked. Sandra looked down as Juniper tried to put 2 feet into her tote bag. "No." Wes glanced at her. Sandra smiled. "That's why I think she'll fit." Juniper left that afternoon. The house felt different before the car reached the end of the street. There was no dramatic silence. Otis still moved between the kitchen and laundry room. Tessa still walked to the back door. The refrigerator still hummed. But the empty spaces had become easier to see. That evening, Tessa walked into the laundry room. She checked the corner where Juniper usually slept. Then the folded towel near the wall. Then the pen. She stood there for a moment. Wes watched from the doorway. He did not decide what the behavior meant. Eventually, Tessa turned and went to lie near the living room window. Otis followed her. The next morning, Wes found the tennis ball beside the back door. He rolled it outside. Tessa chased it. Otis remained another 6 days. Howard and Elaine used the time to complete a second home visit, secure 1 section of fencing, and practice the visual cues Naomi had recommended. Wes continued finding questions. Had they marked the gate so visitors knew not to leave it open? Would their niece use the same signals? Did the neighbor understand which side Otis heard less clearly? Marlene answered until she stopped answering. On the final afternoon, Wes drove Otis to the Mercer's house himself. He told everyone it was because the roads were slick. Nobody argued. Howard was waiting in the yard. A light snow had begun. The backyard was simple. Fence, small shed, 2 bare maple trees, tracks leading from the porch. Otis stood beside Wes. Howard did not call his name. He raised one hand, the familiar signal. Otis looked at Howard, then at Wes. For one brief second, Wes thought the puppy might stay beside him. The thought brought relief. Then shame for the relief. Howard gave the signal again. Otis stepped forward. On the 3rd cue, he trotted across the packed snow. Howard crouched. Otis reached him, sniffed his glove, then circled behind his leg. Elaine came out carrying the blue folder containing the adoption paperwork. Wes handed her the veterinary packet. "His hearing test is in the back." "I saw it." "Naomi's training notes too." We have copies. Don't approach suddenly from his left side, Elaine said gently. We know. Wes nodded. Howard stood and gave Otis another cue. The puppy sat. Not perfectly, but close enough. There should have been something more to say. Wes had spent weeks weighing Otis, teaching him signals, watching him beneath the kitchen chair, writing rules for a future home. Now the future home was standing directly in front of him, and it did not need instructions he had not already given. Wes put his gloves back on. Call Marlene if anything changes. We will. He opened the truck door. Otis looked over once, then Howard moved his hand. The puppy's attention shifted back. Wes drove away. That evening, the house had only one dog in it. Wes noticed the absence of the puppies before he removed his boots. No scrambling paws, no object mysteriously moving across the kitchen floor. No Bram testing cabinet doors. No Juniper stealing cloth. No Otis watching his hands. Tessa walked past him toward the laundry room. The pen was still there, empty. She stepped inside, sniffed along one side, then the other. Wes stood in the hall. After a moment, Tessa walked back out. She did not remain beside the pen. She went to the living room. Wes followed more slowly. The old tennis ball lay beneath the coffee table. Tessa lowered her head, picked it up, and carried it to him. She stopped near his chair. The ball dropped onto the floor. Wes stared at it. You have terrible timing. Tessa waited. He sat down. For the first time in weeks, there was no feeding schedule due within the hour. No wait to record. No adoption meeting to prepare for. No puppy depending on the next thing Wes decided. Tessa nudged the ball with her nose. It rolled against his boot. Wes lifted one foot and pushed it across the room. The ball bumped against the wall. Tessa ran after it. She returned almost immediately. This time, Wes was ready. He rolled it again. For the first 2 mornings after Otis left, Wes woke before the alarm. At 3:17 on Wednesday, he sat upright in bed with the certainty that something had been forgotten. For several seconds, his mind searched automatically. Water, feeding, weight, laundry. Then he remembered. There were no puppies to weigh. No one needed a 3 in the morning check. The house was quiet enough that he could hear the furnace cycling in the basement. Wes lay back down. He did not fall asleep again. Tessa adjusted faster than he did, though not in any way Wes could easily measure. She still entered the laundry room sometimes. She still sniffed along the edge of the empty pen before Marlene came to collect it. But without Bram, Juniper, and Otis demanding her attention, other parts of the dog began to emerge. Tessa slept in the living room now, usually beside the front window, where afternoon sun warmed one rectangle of the floor. She carried the old tennis ball to the back door most mornings. Sometimes she ate breakfast immediately. Other mornings, she stood over the bowl, looked toward Wes, then walked to the door. The first time she did it, Wes checked the food. Nothing wrong with it. He added a spoonful of warm water. Tessa still ignored the bowl. You are becoming difficult. Her ears shifted. Wes put on his boots. They walked half a mile through the fresh snow. When they returned, Tessa ate everything. By the 3rd time it happened, Wes stopped arguing. Naomi came for another examination at the end of the week. Tessa stood calmly while the veterinarian checked her weight and general condition. Naomi paid particular attention to how her body was adjusting after weaning. Everything looks good, she said. When can she move? Naomi glanced up. You in a hurry? No. Then let's give her a little more time. Wes leaned against the kitchen counter. How much? Another week or so. I want her comfortable, weight stable, no problems after weaning. Wes nodded. Naomi closed her teal notebook. She's not just the puppy's mother anymore. Wes looked toward the living room. Tessa had taken the tennis ball beneath the coffee table. She was never just that. Naomi looked at him briefly. No. That was all she said. Wes appreciated her for leaving it there.
Marlene began looking for Tessa's permanent home separately from the puppies. That process moved more slowly. People liked puppies. Puppies came with blank pages in people's minds. An adult German Shepherd came with habits, preferences, history, and a personality already partly formed. One applicant wanted an outdoor guard dog for a rural property. Marlene declined. Another wanted a running partner but traveled for work almost every week. That application did not move forward either. Wes read the summaries but said less this time. He still asked questions. He no longer added requirements after every answer. Several days later, Marlene called.
I have someone I want Tessa to meet. Who? Joan Kellerman, 58, runs winter trail operations west of town. What kind of trails? County snowshoe and cross-country routes, seasonal maintenance, signage, closures. Dogs? 2 German Shepherds before. Last one died 3 years ago. Fence? Yes. Work schedule? Marlene paused. You're improving. That wasn't an answer. She's home most evenings. Dogs are allowed at the trail office some days, but she isn't looking for a working dog. That last sentence made Wes pay attention. What is she looking for? A dog. Joan arrived on Saturday wearing a forest green outdoor jacket over an oatmeal sweater, charcoal hiking pants, and worn brown boots. Her silver blonde hair was braided loosely down the back of her neck, and the skin around her eyes had the fine lines of someone who spent more time outdoors than inside. She did not carry treats openly. She did not kneel. She did not say Tessa's name 5 times in a bright voice. She came into the living room, sat in the chair Marlene indicated, and talked to Wes instead. Tessa remained near the window. Joan glanced toward her once, then back to Wes. How much walking does she like? More than I expected. Ball? 5 minutes, maybe 10, then she's done. Cars? Watches them, doesn't chase. Strangers? Depends how much they insist on becoming friends. Joan smiled. Reasonable. For nearly 40 minutes, Tessa kept 6 or 7 feet between herself and Joan. Joan never reduced the distance. When she left, she said, "Nice dog." Wes looked toward Tessa. That's it? What else should it be? He had no answer. The second meeting happened 3 days later. This time Joan brought a small pouch of treats, but she gave one to Wes first. For consistency. He handed it to Tessa. Joan tossed the next one onto the floor midway between them. Tessa ate it. A few minutes later, Joan placed another on her open palm. Tessa approached, stretched her neck, took it, and moved away again. Joan did not touch her. Wes noticed that too. You always this patient? He asked. No. Joan looked toward Tessa. Just when impatience doesn't help. They talked about trail work. Joan described checking signs after storms, walking low routes before opening them to visitors, clearing light branches, and spending hours in a small office where the loudest thing was usually the heater. I don't need her to guard anything, she said, and I don't need her to prove she's useful. Wes looked at her. Joan was watching Tessa, not him. The sentence passed without explanation. That made it stay. The third meeting was the following weekend. By then, Tessa no longer watched Joan continuously. Joan sat in the same chair. Tessa wandered through the room, drank water, checked the kitchen, then eventually settled on the floor several feet from Joan's boots. Not against them, not touching. Just near enough that no one had to pretend it was accidental. Marlene looked at Wes. He kept his eyes on the dog. Joan did not move. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. It was probably the best meeting they had. Naomi completed Tessa's final check at the beginning of Wes's 6th week of fostering. Her weight was steady. Her post-weaning recovery looked normal. Her coat had improved. The tennis ball remained in her mouth for most of the conversation. Naomi signed the veterinary portion of the file. She's ready. Wes took the folder. He did not ask, ready for what? He knew.
Marlene completed the rest of the paperwork with Joan. The transfer was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Wes slept poorly Monday night. He did not cancel. Joan arrived shortly after 9. There were no balloons, no photographs in the driveway, no speech from Marlene. Wes packed Tessa's food, medical records, the leash she had been using, and a blanket from the living room.
He found the tennis ball beneath the couch. For a moment, he held it. Then he put it in the bag. Joan noticed. "That hers?" "She thinks it is." "Then it is." Wes handed her the bag. Tessa walked to Joan's vehicle on leash without resistance. At the open rear door, she paused and looked toward the yard. Wes felt himself stop breathing. Joan waited. Tessa sniffed the edge of the seat, then climbed in. That was all. Wes closed the door. Joan shook his hand. "I'll send updates through Marlene." "You don't have to send them every day. I wasn't planning to." "Good," Joan smiled. "Maybe once in a while." Wes nodded. "Once in a while is fine." The vehicle pulled away. Tessa did not appear at the rear window. Wes stood outside until the sound of the engine disappeared. Then he went back into the house. The laundry room looked larger than it had 6 weeks earlier. The pen was gone. The scale had been returned to the rescue. The food containers were empty. The water bowl had been washed and stacked with the other supplies. Wes moved one basket and found a gray sock beneath the chair. Juniper. At least, he assumed it had been Juniper. There was no way to prove it. One corner had been chewed into a fringe. Wes sat down on the chair with the sock in his hand. The silence felt different from the silence before Tessa arrived. Before, silence had been something Wes maintained. Everything had a place. The television stayed off unless he intended to watch something. The phone rang mostly for work. Meals occurred because the clock said they should. Now the quiet contained evidence that something had happened there. A scratch near the cabinet. A faint mark where the pen had rested. A tennis ball-sized circle of clean floor beneath the couch. Wes realized he had sent the ball with Tessa. The thought hurt more than he expected. He did not go looking for another one. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. His phone lay beside his hand. For several minutes, he considered calling Public Works. The afternoon forecast included light snow. He could ask Collins whether the trucks were ready. He could ask whether the salt delivery had arrived. He could find some reason to make himself useful. He picked up the phone, opened the contact list, then passed Collins's name. He stopped at Dale. Wes typed, "Generator still running?" The reply came a minute later. "Running fine, but Thursday I've got a guy who needs to learn how to maintain it." Wes read the message twice. He looked toward the empty laundry room, then typed, "7?" 3 dots appeared. 7. Wes set the phone down. The coffee was still hot. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall. For once, there was nothing in the house that needed him immediately. Wes stayed at the table anyway. Wes's last shift at Red Cedar Public Works began at 5:11 on a Friday morning. There was no storm, no emergency call, no machine waiting with its hood raised. The sky was clear. The temperature sat just below freezing, and a thin layer of fresh snow covered the yard in a way that made the plows look cleaner than they were. Wes arrived wearing the same faded navy work jacket he had worn through countless winter mornings. His black watch was on his left wrist. The steel thermos sat in his hand. Nothing about the morning looked important enough to be a last day. That helped. Collins was already inside. He was standing at the dispatch board with 2 route sheets spread out in front of him. "You're early," Wes said. Collins looked at the wall clock. "You're earlier." "Not the point." Collins smiled. Wes moved closer to the board. The Weather Service had issued a freezing fog advisory for low areas west of town. Collins had already assigned one truck to check the hospital road and another to monitor the bridge near County Road 6. Wes read everything, then read it again. He found nothing to correct. That was becoming a familiar irritation. You've got Benson on the bridge? Yeah. He knows the north approach freezes first? I told him. Wes nodded. Collins waited. That's it? He asked. What else do you want? Usually you find something. I'm trying to improve. Collins laughed. Wes did not. But he almost did. By 9, somebody had placed a sheet cake in the break room. The frosting was white with blue letters. Good luck, Wes. He stared at it. Who wrote that? A mechanic named Tyler raised a hand. Bakery did. Tell them their spacing is terrible. They said retirement makes people critical. I was critical before retirement. That's true. No one made a speech. Wes had specifically asked for that. Instead, people came in and out of the room between jobs. Someone shook his hand. Someone told him not to become one of those retirees who visited every morning. Someone else asked who would complain about the coffee now. The town gave him a new jacket with the Red Cedar Public Works patch stitched neatly over the chest. Wes held it up. It's too clean. Give it time, Tyler said. Wes folded the jacket over the back of a chair. He cut one piece of cake, then another because the first had been too small and nobody needed to know that. Near noon, Collins came through the door. Need the primary radio. Wes looked at him. Collins glanced at Wes's belt. For a second, neither man moved. The radio had been clipped there since before sunrise. Wes had known this moment was coming. Knowing had not improved it. He released the clip. The radio felt heavier in his hand than it should have. The casing was scratched. The push-to-talk button had worn smooth at one edge. A strip of white tape across the bottom read, Ransom. Collins did not reach for it immediately. We can switch the label later. Wes looked down at the tape, then peeled it off himself. The adhesive left a pale rectangle on the black plastic. He folded the strip once, put it in his pocket, then handed Collins the radio. Collins clipped it onto his belt. The fit looked wrong, not because it was wrong, because Wes was used to seeing it somewhere else. Keep it charged, Wes said. I will. Battery starts dropping fast, replace it. Don't nurse it another winter. I know. People say that right before they nurse a battery another winter. Collins smiled. I'll replace it. Wes nodded. That was all. At 2:37, the radio on Collins's belt came alive. Freezing moisture had begun forming on an exposed stretch of County Road 12. The voice from dispatch was calm, routine. Collins answered. Wes's hand moved before he consciously stopped it. Not all the way, just a small motion toward the place on his belt where the radio had been for years. His fingers found nothing. Collins looked at him. Wes lowered his hand. Take truck 7, he said. Collins paused, then, already fueled? Wes nodded once. Go. The crews moved, doors opened, engines started, amber lights turned across the yard. Wes stood near Bay 3 while the trucks rolled out one by one. Nobody asked him to come. That hurt. He let it. The last plow cleared the gate. The overhead door descended. The garage became quieter. Wes looked at the route board. Every name was where it needed to be. Every truck had an assignment. The road would be treated, traffic would move, an ambulance, if one needed that road, would get through. Nothing had failed because Wes stayed behind. He went to the locker room. His locker was almost empty. One spare pair of gloves, a pencil, 2 packets of instant coffee he would never voluntarily drink. He took the gloves, left the coffee. Then he found the strip of tape in his pocket. Ransom. Wes looked at it for a moment. He did not throw it away. He stuck it inside the cover of the small maintenance notebook he had carried for years. Then he closed the notebook and put it in his bag. The first Monday after retirement felt longer than any Monday Wes could remember. The second was easier. By the third, he stopped waking before 4 unless the weather actually changed. He began going to the community workshop twice a week. At first, Dale gave him small reasons to come. A snowblower that pulled to one side, a generator that had not been winterized, a bench vise mounted badly enough to offend Wes on principle. Then, people started asking for him. Not by title, not as chief, not because they knew what he had done in the Navy, most did not. They knew him as the tall man, with silver at his temples, who could explain why a machine would not start without making the owner feel stupid. One Thursday, Dale pointed towards 6 folding chairs arranged near a workbench.
"What's that?"
"People." "I can see that. They want to know how to prepare a generator before an outage." Wes looked at the chairs. "You tell them." "They asked for you." "Why?" "Because last time you explained fuel storage without turning it into a religion." Wes stared at him. Dale handed him a marker. "No speeches." "Wasn't planning one." The session lasted 40 minutes, then an hour. Someone asked the same question twice. Wes answered it twice. He noticed that afterward. About 2 months later, Marlene sent him a message while he was at the workshop. 4 photographs. Wes opened the first. Bram stood between rows of apple trees with mud covering both front paws and half his chest. Mark was visible in the background holding a hose. The second showed Juniper asleep in a dog bed beside Sandra's bookshelf. One entire corner of the bed was missing. Wes enlarged the image. "Of course," he muttered. The third photograph showed Otis in Howard and Elaine's backyard. Howard had one hand raised in a visual cue. Otis was watching him. Several feet behind the puppy, one of Elaine's winter boots sat abandoned in the snow. Wes smiled. The last photo took longer. Tessa was asleep upside down on Joan's sofa. Her back legs rested against the cushions. One ear had folded sideways. The old tennis ball sat beneath the coffee table. Joan's message beneath the photo read, "I said she wasn't getting on the furniture. We revised the policy." Wes laughed loudly enough that Dale looked across the room. "What?" "Nothing." "That sounded like something." Wes turned the phone around. Dale studied the photographs. Dogs looked terrible, clearly suffering, especially that one on the couch. Tragic. Wes looked at the pictures again. He did not feel the need to drive to any of those houses. He did not need to inspect the fences. He did not need to remind Howard which ear Otis heard better with. He saved the photographs. That afternoon, he printed all 4 on the old color printer in the office. He pinned them to the bulletin board above the workshop coffee station. No labels, no explanation. Dale saw him do it. He said nothing. Late winter held on longer than expected that year. One afternoon, a new band of snow moved across Red Cedar just before closing time. Wes and Dale shut down the workshop together. Wes checked the side door once. Dale checked it again. "Thought I was the old one," Wes said. "You are." They stepped outside. Across the parking lot, the Public Works garage glowed beneath tall yard lights. An overhead door opened. A snowplow rolled out. Amber lights reflected across the fresh snow. Wes recognized the truck. Truck 7. Collins was probably on the radio. For a moment, Wes stood watching. Dale pulled on his gloves. "Dinner?" Wes did not answer immediately. The plow turned onto the road. Its blade dropped. Snow curled away from the pavement in a clean white line. The truck continued without slowing. Wes watched until the amber lights disappeared around the corner. Then he looked across the street. The diner windows were bright. People sat inside beneath yellow lamps. Someone opened the door and a brief rectangle of warmth fell across the sidewalk. Dale had already taken 2 steps before looking back. "You coming?" Wes adjusted the collar of his jacket. "Yeah." They crossed the parking lot. Behind them, another plow left the garage. Wes did not turn around. "Let's go." Sometimes the hardest part of moving forward is realizing that life can continue without the role we once believed defined us. Wes learned that being needed is not the same as being valued. The plows could keep running. The puppies could find new homes, and Tessa could begin a new life. And still, there was a place for him in the world. Maybe some doors in our lives close, not because our purpose is over, but because we are being invited to discover a different way to matter. If this story reminded you of a season in your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about loyalty, second chances, and ordinary people finding their way home mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. May you find peace in what has ended, courage for what comes next, and someone worth walking beside along the way.